In today's workforce here in the Philippines, one little word in your contract can literally change everything about your career, your rights, and your future. It's this fine line that millions of us are walking every single day, whether you're a gig worker, a freelancer, or in a traditional office job. And trust me, getting it wrong has huge consequences. It all comes down to this one simple sounding question. Are you an employee or are you an independent contractor? Now, you might think you know the answer, but in the eyes of Philippine law, this is one of the most important labels you can have in your entire professional life.
Because think about it like this. On one side of that line, you've got this whole treasure chest of legal protections and benefits. But on the other side, well, you're pretty much on your own. And the key that the Supreme Court uses to decide which side you're on is a single, incredibly powerful test.
So let's get into it. How does the law actually draw that line in the sand? It all comes down to a legal framework that's really designed to figure out one thing: who's really calling the shots?
Okay, so the courts use what's called the fourfold test. They look at the stuff that seems obvious, right? Who hired you, who pays your salary, who has the power to fire you. But here's the kicker. It's that fourth one, the power of control, that is the absolute king. The first three can all point to you being an employee, but if that fourth one, control, isn't there, the whole thing can flip.
So what in the world is this control test? It's actually pretty simple when you break it down. It's not about whether your boss controls the result of your work, like telling you, hey, hit the sales quota. No, it's about whether they control the method, the specific way you do your job, the tools you use, the hours you work. The law wants to know who dictates the how, not just the what.
Let me give you a super clear example. An independent contractor, they're hired for a specific result. Think of a sales agent who just has to meet a quota. How they get there is totally up to them. But an employee, their method is controlled. So if that same sales agent has to follow a company script, work from 8 to 5, and report to the office every day, boom, they're an employee. It always comes back to the how.
Now, that's the theory, but we all know the real world is way, way messier, right? So let's look at how this test actually plays out in some fascinating, high-profile Supreme Court cases where the lines got incredibly blurry.
Okay, check this out. You have two media personalities, both working for the same network, ABS-CBN. On one hand, you've got Jay Sanza, a veteran broadcaster. He had huge control over his own shows, his content, his schedule. The Supreme Court said he was an independent contractor, a special talent hired for his unique skills. But then you have Dumpit Murillo, a newscaster at the very same company. He had a fixed schedule and he had to read scripts that were written for him. See, the network controlled his method. And because of that, the court ruled he was an employee. Same company, totally different levels of control, and completely different legal statuses.
And don't think for a second this is some old, dusty law. It's being applied right now to the gig economy. The Supreme Court looked at Grab drivers and said, you know what? They're independent contractors. Why? Because while they have a goal, they control their own method. They choose their own hours, their own routes. But in a different case, Lazada riders were ruled to be employees. Why the change? Because Lazada controlled their method by giving them exclusive schedules and pre-planned routes. It just goes to show how this old test is being adapted for our modern world. So we've seen how the law draws this line. But what's the big deal? Why does this distinction matter so much? Well, because being officially classified as an employee isn't just a fancy title. It is literally the key to a vault of rights and benefits that are locked into our laws.
And I mean it, this legal recognition is absolutely everything. It's the gateway to a whole set of protections under the Philippine Labor Code. Protections that independent contractors, by their very definition, just don't get. So what exactly is in this vault?
So what are we talking about here? Well, first and foremost, the big one, security of tenure. That means you're protected from being fired without a just and valid reason. Then, of course, you get all the mandatory benefits, 13th month pay and contributions to SSS, PhilHealth, and PagBig. On top of that, you have paid leaves, overtime pay, and holiday pay. These are fundamental rights that only apply if you're an employee. But hold on, here's a twist. Even if you are an employee with all these rights, your boss still has power. They have something the law calls management prerogative. But, and this is a very, very big but, that power is not unlimited. It has some really sharp legal boundaries. So, management prerogative is basically the employer's right to, well, run their business. It's their power to do things like transfer employees, assign different tasks, and enforce company rules and discipline.
It's their zone of control inside the workplace. However, and this is crucial, it is not a blank check for them to do whatever they want. The law puts up some serious guardrails. Any of these actions must be done in good faith. They can't use their power as a tool for punishment, for revenge, or to put an employee in a situation that's just totally unfair or unreasonable.
And believe me, the Supreme Court has been crystal clear on this. There was a case with an employee, a Mr. Pajarito, who was suddenly told he was being transferred from Manila with only 3 days' notice. He asked for just a small delay because his child was graduating, but the company refused and then fired him. The court looked at that and said absolutely not. They called it an illegal dismissal, ruling that the transfer was unreasonable and done in bad faith. It just shows that the courts will definitely step in when a boss goes too far. So this brings us to one final, really important question. The control test, this idea we've been talking about, was designed for a totally different era of work. But today, with remote jobs, AI, and a gig economy that's just exploding, those lines between a result and a method are getting blurrier than ever. As the very idea of what a job is continues to shift under our feet, you have to wonder, do our legal definitions need to evolve with it? That's the big question we'll all be watching.